Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? Please welcome the executive editor of The Economist, Mr. Daniel Franklin.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome to our gala dinner on the world in 2015. Welcome, first of all and foremost, to President Keynote and his ministers who are with us tonight. Very grateful for them coming to us to join us here in Singapore. Welcome to all of you, especially those of you who are hosting tables. And I see a lot of familiar faces who've been here in previous years, so it's very good to see you back. Just to tell you a little bit about what to expect this evening. First of all, it's very important that you eat. So please do enjoy your food. The starter is there in front of you. It's there for you to eat, not to stare at. So please go ahead and eat. The idea this evening is that we really, first of all, focus on 2015 and have some thoughts about the year ahead. We're going to hear from the President of the Philippines. We're going to have a conversation with him a little bit later. We're also going to hear a lot of different perspectives. We're going to have some intellectual entertainment, but also, I think and I hope, a lot of fun. So please do enjoy this evening above all. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors who've made this evening possible. Our lead sponsor, Citi, our supporting sponsors, the Singleton, Singapore Management University, and our PR agency, Edelman. So thank you to all of you. We couldn't do this without your support. Part of the fun that we're going to have this evening, we're going to hear later from Jim Richardson from National Geographic, and he's going to talk about photography. So you're going to test your own photographic skills this evening. You're invited to take photographs of this evening, preferably before the end of the dinner. Your impressions of this evening, let your artistic talents run wild. Send them to Conferences Asia at economist.com, or tweet them at #EconGala. And Jim at the end will comment on a selection of your photographs. So here's your chance to be assessed by one of the top photographers for National Geographic. We're also going to have a table quiz, as usual. Those of you who've been here before, you have a great chance to win a prize. So your quiz on the world in 2015, I'll be reading out the questions just before dinner. Before we start with the first part of the evening, I just want to also announce that we had a competition organized at the School of Singapore Management University, and we had 3 excellent finalists. I saw all their predictions for 2015 are in your program. So Gabriel Lowe was one of the finalists. I'm going to pronounce this name wrong, but Joel Wen Rong Tang was another. The winner was Caleb Kahu. So I'd like to congratulate all of you. And could I ask you to stand up, please? Could you stand up? Thank you. Well done, Caleb. And I have to say that you are the first to have entered into the spirit of this evening, which is to stick your neck out and make predictions. I also have to say that all your predictions were distinctly gloomy, so we don't have to believe these predictions of doom. We're going to have some cheerful things this evening as well. Now, first of all, it's my pleasure to introduce to you my colleague, Vijay Vaitheswaran, who is from our bureau chief in Shanghai, and who writes very eloquently about business. One of the feedback we've had is you wanted to hear more about business in this evening, and there is nobody better to tell you about business in 2015 than Vijay. So Vijay, you're very welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're off to a good start. I can see a full crowd, and you're ready for some predictions about business in 2015. Sometimes I've discovered, though, when we gaze into the crystal ball about the future, it's quite helpful to reflect on the past first. So with that in mind, if you'll allow me, I'm going to present to you a few covers that we did in The Economist on the big business stories of 2014. These are actual covers that ran in The Economist in the last 10 months or so, a year of riding the dragon. In the beginning of the year, we started the year with a look at multinationals and some of their troubles in China. Now, it must be said, China and multinationals have had a long and beautiful love affair. Unlike Korea, for example, or Japan, during the comparable phases of their development, they were quite closed to foreign companies. China welcomed foreign companies with open arms. Sometimes this was to get access to the best management talent, world-class products and brands. However, it was also to get access to technologies and intellectual property rights that might disappear. Whatever the reason, multinationals certainly had a great bonanza. It's seemingly endless growth and opportunities for a couple of decades. Alas, love is on the rocks. In recent months, we've seen the government crack down using its monopolies laws, for example, against foreign companies in particular. We've seen the state media, CCTV and others, come after foreign companies. For example, it was a big kerfuffle on official media that Starbucks charges too much for its coffee. Is there any place in the world that Starbucks sells cheap coffee? Do you know? In any case, but there are other forces as well. The markets are getting very competitive. Chinese companies are getting better and better, and so they're getting tough competition. And Chinese consumers are getting quite sophisticated. They're global in their mindset, they're on the internet, they're very social in their commerce, and they're refusing to pay unjustified premiums just because a brand is foreign. In short, life is getting quite hard for multinationals. But will the love affair last? Consider this. In 2015, we predict that for the first time, investment by foreign multinationals into China will be surpassed by the investment made by Chinese companies outside of China. So the Economist prediction was, it's the end of the golden age for multinationals in China. We also looked this year, in this cover story, at the education business globally. And this, believe me, is an industry ripe for change. There are three big problems, we argued, with education. First, it's too top-down. I mean, you can go back to the days of Aristotle, and since then, to this day, we have some universities here and some students, you'll know, classes are held traditionally when the professor decides to turn up at the anointed hour in the specific place, and wisdom is imparted from on high, from the guru. Well, the world is changing. That model is not as relevant anymore. Another problem is the system is too brittle. Now, that might have, the sort of one-size-fits-all approach to education may have worked in the Industrial Revolution, when everybody got a job in a factory and you had a job for life and so on. But the world has changed. We can't have such a brittle educational system anymore in the current world economy. So increasingly, the third problem is irrelevance. We live in innovation economies without careers for life, and we need an educational system that can keep up with that. We argued that there are three forces for change that are at work. One is costs. Anybody who's in university, like some of you, and certainly the parents of children know, costs are skyrocketing. And particularly in places like the United States, they're completely out of reach for many people. People are getting saddled with student debt, and they're rebelling. It's not working. Another is the changing patterns of demand in the marketplace. Again, the shift from economies that value brawn to ones that value brain means that we need educational systems that give, for example, lifelong learning opportunities. And finally, the biggest force for disruption is the internet. In this industry, as in any other, it's completely upending the business model of education. And so the new paradigm is really that anyone can be educated anywhere, anytime. So we saw in this cover story three dynamic outcomes. First, now we can have much more experimentation. Even if you were trained for years as an accountant and then discovered that you hate accounting. In the old days, well, guess what? You're out of luck. Now, in your spare time, you can go online and take a MOOC one of these massively online courses and study artificial intelligence or art history or what have you. Bill Gates sits with his children and watches the Khan Academy, a very popular series of courses on math, physics, and so on, numerous topics, with his children, and it's available free on YouTube for anyone in the world. The second great change that's coming is democratization of education. You can be in a rural village in Africa or Latin America or here in Asia, and on your mobile phone, get world-class education in a local language. That is a profound change. And finally, maybe more importantly, the change is resilience. It used to be, if you were a salaryman, you lost your job, you were a failure. There was really not many opportunities open to you. Now, it still stinks to lose your job, don't get me wrong, but at least now there's an opportunity to retrain, rejuvenate, and get back in the game again. So the Economist predicted in this cover story that in today's ideas economy, learning how to learn and learning how to fail will be more important than degrees from Harvard or Yale. Let's turn next to the new age of crony capitalism. Now here I have some bad news and I have some good news. Which do you want first? Bad news, okay, all right. The bad news. This Economist cover story this year said, we've developed a new crony capitalism index. We've become a big data repository for all of our loyal readers like you and coming up with new techniques for you to visualize data. And among the things we've done as a service is to interview chaps like these on the cover here. And what we found out with our numerical analysis is, unfortunately, crony capitalism is on the rise around the world. And this is bad news. What is crony capitalism as opposed to the good, healthy kind involving healthy, competitive, honest companies? Well, it tends to be in industries that are close to influence peddling, bribery, dubious or excessive lobbying, and so on, and rent-seeking, ultimately, to use the economic jargon. And without painting too broad a brush, casinos, resources, it must be said, banking sometimes falls into this as well. And so our analysis found numerous countries in which the number of billionaires spawned from cronyistic industries is very much on the rise. And the problem with cronyism is that it kills competition. It harms healthy companies that are doing things honestly. But more than that, it increases inequality, one of the great concerns of our age globally, and ultimately lowers long-term growth. Now, I promised you some good news. So what's the good news, you say? Well, the first piece of good news is these crony capitalists are often their own worst enemies. It's dangerous to be a crony capitalist. And sometimes having friends with benefits in the bedroom, like in the boardroom, is a dangerous game. And so we actually had a Russian oligarch who recently visited The Economist and confided that, in his world, he has to be a crony capitalist. He has to be in the church, he put it. But he sits in the second pew, not the first pew. The other reason to have some hope, some optimism, is that there is a movement amongst the educated, urban, and increasingly affluent and vocal middle class around the world. And we've seen numerous examples of the middle class revolting against the excesses of crony capitalism and movements, anti-corruption movements, taking off. So The Economist predicted in this cover story that this revolution could save capitalism from the crony capitalists. Let me turn to the next topic that we took up, which is technology and jobs. Now, how many of you think that technological innovation, disruption, is killing jobs? Hands up, just to get an idea. Anybody think that? Well, you must be the only people on earth, because everywhere else you go, there is an enormous controversy about a wave of technology stealing jobs. And this was something that we found. Now, this is perhaps because we're living through an era of high-tech entrepreneurship. It's a lot easier now to start a high-tech entrepreneurial outfit than it has been in living memory, certainly. Part of the reason is we're living through an age of exponentially growing technologies. From genomics to proteomics, you can look at synthetic biology. It's a field that didn't even exist a decade ago. Battery storage, advanced materials, clean tech. I can go on. The numerous fields with the rapid growth in the technology and science. But as well, the way that we innovate is itself being transformed We've gone from a top-down model of innovation to one that's much more open, collaborative, user-generated, that's allowing micro multinationals to start from day one. So it's really a wonderful time for our tech entrepreneurship. The problem is, in country after country, this is perceived as a job killer. In fact, if you, maybe the headlines explain it. When you see companies like WhatsApp or Instagram valued at billions and billions of dollars, and you look carefully and you see how many people work for this company, it turns out to be hundreds, sometimes dozens of people. People get the feeling that this is a job-destroying kind of enterprise. Part of the reason is previous waves of technology entrepreneurship and disruption, for example, that came from globalization and automation, affected blue-collar jobs. Now it's also affecting white-collar jobs and is a much more politically potent force. Hence the backlash in Silicon Valley against the Google buses and so on. But if you look to the long term, periods of extraordinary technological invention have always had a lag before they became value-creating innovations in the marketplace. If you look back on the Victorian era, for example, it took a long time, decades, before grid electrification, modern chemistry, the internal combustion engine, ultimately produced the industries that created millions upon millions of jobs. So the Economist predicted that once again, globalization and Googleization will in time create entirely new industries that create tomorrow's jobs. Our final cover from this year was perhaps one of the biggest stories of the year, Alibaba, the Chinese e-commerce company. Now, Alibaba is a true business model innovator, even though it's often compared with Amazon and eBay. If you look closely, the business model compared to Amazon is quite different. Amazon is an asset-heavy company. They own warehouses, they own logistics, they even own merchandise. Alibaba is a platform, asset-light as it's called, that connects buyers and sellers. Compared to eBay, for example, eBay owns PayPal, at least for now. Alibaba created something called Alipay, which itself may be floated in the next few months. And Alipay actually found a way quite novel and quite distinct from PayPal to use escrow. And by using escrow, Alibaba ingeniously solved the problem of trust in China, where it's quite hard to trust the counterparty that you're dealing with. So it's a true innovator. And the company caught the wave perfectly. The rise of China's middle class. This year, 2014, China became the world's biggest e-commerce market, passing the US. It's now the biggest m-commerce market as well, with mobile phones. And the performance is breathtaking. There's more sales on its platforms than Amazon and eBay combined. On November 11th, which is called Singles Day in China, they sold more than $8 billion worth of merchandise in one day on their platforms. And small wonder then that their IPO in New York a few months ago was the biggest ever seen. It's now worth more, Alibaba, than Walmart, more than GE, more than IBM. But this all came as no surprise to readers of The Economist, because this cover predicting that Alibaba would become one of the most valuable companies in the world was written in March, not 2014, but 2013. In that spirit of daring predictions, allow me to stick my neck out. I'm now going to turn to our predictions for business in 2015, which is a year of disruption. And we have a treat for you. These covers are specially made for tonight, for our gala, by our graphics experts in London. And so you will not see them anywhere else. First, let me turn to Xiaomi, which is probably the hottest brand of smartphones in the world right now. It's a Chinese startup company, hardly 4 years old, but unlike Alibaba, it's a clever copycat. It resembles Apple in a number of ways. Those of you who have Xiaomi or have looked at it, you know that it actually looks quite a lot like an iPhone, the curvy design, the sleek user interface. The company's founder, Lei Jun, he loves actually to give presentations in blue jeans and black tops, reminiscent of you-know-who. But their business model actually borrows from Amazon. unlike Apple, they sell their Xiaomi phones at less than half the price, barely at cost. And then they make money on additional value-added services, software, pretty much like Jeff Bezos sells you a Kindle at cost and then makes his money afterward. But to be fair, Xiaomi is also learning to do its own things. It, for example, has an online-only sales model, which is distinctive. Its marketing is quite distinctive. And they're very close to their fan base. So user-generated innovations are an area where they have great potential. And they've achieved domestic success. They're the #1 smartphone in China now, surpassing Apple and Samsung. Next year, they'll sell 100 million smartphones. And they're heading overseas. Now here, you'll know they're already here in Southeast Asia. They've recently launched in India. They're going to Brazil and Russia. But the big question we have to ask is, can Xiaomi, a Chinese tech innovator, really go global? We think they have a long road ahead. When we look at the experience of, say, Lenovo and Huawei, who have succeeded, it took a long time for them to figure out how to conquer sophisticated markets, to figure out how to do branding globally, and also, it must be admitted, to overcome some anti-Chinese bias in some parts of the world. And it's also a tougher road for Xiaomi than it was for Alibaba. Even though Alibaba floated in New York, it's actually focused almost entirely on the Chinese market, whereas Xiaomi clearly wants to grow overseas. And at the end of that road that Xiaomi is going, guess who's there? Apple and Samsung, waiting with their armies of lawyers ready to slap them with IP lawsuits, right? So the Economist predicts that if Xiaomi wants to become the next Apple, it must transform from a nimble imitator to an original innovator. Let's turn next to Silicon Valley, where we see that venture capitalists have long had their head in the clouds. You can see this fella here wearing the Google glasses and blood pressure monitors and various other smart devices. But in the recent years, what the Silicon Valley VCs have been investing in is actually cloud computing, search, social, kind of fluffy areas. The old-fashioned engineering giants like Hewlett-Packard have been overshadowed. But in 2015, we predict that we'll see the rise of intelligent devices like this fellow's wearing, hopefully with a slightly different fashion ethos. Google, once again, leads with driverless cars, with Google Glass robots. But we're also seeing some other new trends. Wearables, smart medical monitors are coming, and connected appliances. We all knew the day would come when our toilet would call the plumber directly. Well, it's coming. So Silicon Valley is becoming an engineering mecca again. And we predict that the days are coming, the glory days, when two geeks tinkering in the garage can once again change the world. Let's turn to our next cover. It's time for cars to talk, the connected car. I apologize, the print is so small, it's quite hard to see what these cars are saying.
I've just driven past the mother of all potholes.
Thank you. We'll take avoiding action. P.S. Tell your driver there are speed cameras in 2 miles.
It's true, it's coming. Cars will be talking to each other very soon. This used to be science fiction, but it's fast turning into reality. Why? As recently as when that movie Minority Report came out, it seemed completely out of the realm of possibility, but advances in smart roads, automation, wireless connectivity are making this a reality. Now in 2015, what we're going to see are technologies that assist drivers, but soon enough, they'll be replacing drivers altogether. So things you'll see in the cars coming out in 2015, crash avoidance using radar, cameras, and sensors, automatic emergency braking, and of course the special modems that the cars will use to talk to each other. The companies behind all this will trumpet safety as the main advantage. And that's fair. Globally, up to 3% of global GDP is lost each year as a result of car crashes. Of course, in addition to the lives lost as well. But The Economist predicts that over time, the biggest benefit from driverless cars will be more free time, which we can use to video conference the office and do our emails, or more likely, just play Angry Birds. Our next prediction for next year is the coming wage shock. And we don't mean just in places like China that have had rising salaries for a while, but in developed economies as well, for two reasons. One, we think that as there's a bit of a revival in these economies, labor markets are going to tighten. So we're going to see pressure from the markets. Second, though, we do see that the backlash against inequality that we've seen in the political systems in the West is going to lead to policies that push companies to raise wages. So this is going to squeeze margins, which are, profit margins are at peak levels, but they're going to get squeezed. Now, what will CEOs do? They'll definitely try to shift production to ever cheaper countries. But boy, it's really hard to find an even cheaper country these days. They'll push on productivity, but that's a long-term game. You don't get results immediately. The Economist predicts that this year's noisy headlines about fat cat pay and bankers' bonuses are going to give way to happier headlines about rising wages for long-suffering workers. Our final cover and prediction on the business in 2015 front, the rise of the service economy in China. As you can tell from the Pearl Tower, the Pearl of the Orient, Mickey Mouse is coming to China. By the end of 2015, we'll see the opening of Shanghai Disney, which promises the biggest and most princess-filled Storyland castle in the world. But in addition to marking the arrival of the world's best marketed rodent, this also heralds the triumphant rise of China's middle class. Now, for many, many years, the government has practiced a policy of financial repression, whereby savers actually saw very low rates of interest, often negative, and the money was directed towards investment as a national priority. But this is changing quite quickly. The government is keen to boost consumption, is changing its policies, and promises to do more reform. And as it does, the services sector is taking off. And we predict that very soon, the service sector in China will make up more than 50% of GDP for the first time on a sustainable basis. Where I live in Shanghai, where we're looking forward to this Mickey Mouse arrival, it's over 60%. And as it does, we're going to see a dramatic transformation that could create a $12 trillion opportunity by 2025. The country is moving from manufacturing exports to domestic consumption and towards services. The Economist predicts that if economic liberalization accelerates, a new wave of investment and consumption and competition will transform cheap China into innovative China. Now, I have one final prediction before I yield the floor, and this is a very exciting prediction for us here at The Economist for Business in 2015. We are going to launch our first ever foreign language digital publication called The Economist Global Business Review. This is going to be an elegantly translated product that's going to be available for your smartphones and for your iPads and other devices. It's going to be selecting the very best business, finance, technology, economics articles from The Economist. We will launch first in the Chinese language globally, but other languages are to follow as well. If any of you are interested in hearing more about that, please contact me directly at VVV, as in vavavoom, at economist.com. Thank you very much. Let me hand it back to Daniel Franklin.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Vijay. That was terrific. I think you really got your fill of business predictions. Now it's my great pleasure to welcome and introduce the President of the Philippines, President Aquino. So please join us, and please join me in welcoming the President of the Philippines. Thank you. Well, President Aquino, first of all, thank you very much for joining us here in Singapore tonight. You've been a busy man lately, summit after summit.
Yes.
So can we start by asking you your impressions of the recent summitry? Of course, first and foremost, APEC. What lessons do you bring back, or messages do you bring back from APEC?
Well, I think the very first lesson that we had to handle is next year we're hosting APEC. And of course, all of our 20 other partners, well, 19 other partners were saying, hopefully you top China in your hosting of next year's APEC. Okay, so that presents itself in a bigger challenge. But I guess the commonality of the issues also. I was very keenly aware and interested when China was asked how will they avoid the middle income trap, and the answer that I'm still reflecting on said, we will not be trapped because we will leap over the trap. No. And I was curious to find all of the answers. But again, there was a stating of so-called 5 pillars that APEC should, according to innovative development, they talked of continuing economic reforms, innovative growth, inclusive growth, the pressures of the new economy, the challenges in the new economy, global climate change amongst them.
And what were your impressions of Xi Jinping himself? And your relations have not been easy, shall we say, to put it mildly, in recent times. So how did all that work in your time in Beijing?
Well, we're very, very happily surprised that we had a short discussion after the tree planting ceremony, wherein they stated, President Xi Jinping stated something to the effect that hopefully we will both find constructive solutions to the issues between us, taking into cognizance the very good relations we've had for not just decades, but generations. And hopefully the constructive solutions will be in the same direction. And we responded that primarily our focus is on improving the lot of our people. We are not interested in fighting with anybody, and we would rather concentrate on achieving the growth for our people at the soonest possible time. And hopefully we can encourage others to help us in the pursuit of improving everybody's lives.
We quote you in The Economist this week of saying that there was a meeting of minds over the issue of the islands in the South China Sea. Do we quote you correctly, first of all?
Meeting of the minds that hopefully we are both after a peaceful resolution of the topic. But I must say, the portion about being in the same direction without actually talking about which direction this is. I guess I'm more hopeful rather than having gotten something out with a real substance yet.
Yeah.
But we are hopeful that there will be substance down the line.
There was a lot of talk at APEC about trade. China has the initiative of an APEC trade agreement. Can I ask you why, first of all, is the Philippines not part of TPP, that negotiation? Did you decide to stay clear of that for reasons of...
Initially, if I remember correctly, we were not yet invited when TPP was formed.
But it's meant to be an open arrangement, right?
Presently, we are working with several countries precisely to address some of the concerns. Malaysia, I think, if I remember correctly, was one. And then also America, Japan, I think, is also talking to us.
So if there is an agreement, say next year, do you think you might join at some later date?
We are continuing the studies, and we think we would want to join all of the trade agreements and expand our markets.
And are you keen on the idea of an APEC-wide trade? This is China was pushing this idea at the...
Also, but in the proposal, which is called, I have to make sure the FTAAP.
Yeah.
Okay. Studies are ongoing. The studies will be concluded by 2016. And unfortunately, I stepped down July 1, 2016. So I think I would rather have my successor decide.
We'll go beyond you. Can you perhaps just summarize some of the other things that were on people's minds and what was high up on the agenda? Presumably, Ebola was one of the topics that was important.
Ebola, ISIS, the challenges this pose. Ebola, for instance, for the Philippines, we have a 144-member peacekeeping force in Liberia that has just recently returned home. They are presently in isolation to make sure that they are free from Ebola. Previous to that, we had the scare about MERS. Fortunately for either disease, the Philippines has not yet experienced it, but it does have a very significant dampening effect on interconnectivity. For instance, one of the low-lying fruits that we want to really go after in terms of buttressing our economy is the tourism industry. And this, unfortunately, will put dampers on our ability to generate the numbers that we would want. We're currently about to surpass 5 million foreign tourist arrivals this year, on the way to our 10 million target by 2016. And hopefully this will not be, and other threatened pandemics will be as bad.
Do you feel already an Ebola effect on this, or is are people just traveling less because of worries about Ebola?
Whether it's the Philippines or America or any other country, the idea of safeguarding your borders seems to be paramount for everybody. Yeah. The effect of the possibility of having Ebola is causes some sort of panic, regardless of how advanced your country is. So the Philippines is, again, no exception. We've had, even before we returned our peacekeepers, there was a massive campaign to explain exactly how the risks are being managed.
Can I come back to the specifically relations with China, your own relations with China? Now, the Johnson-South Reef and the dispute over this territory, how is that, what do you see as the next stage of this process? First of all, you have a tribunal.
Arbitration, yes.
So where does that stand at the moment, and how do you see this playing out from here on?
As far as the arbitration before ITLOS is concerned, the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, we have filed a memorial. We understand China has until December 15 of this year to submit their own memorial, after which the various proceedings before ITLOS will continue. There might be a chance of a resolution or a decision even by next year. But
so while you're still...
yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the Philippines has pursued two tracks. One is, in 2002, they, meaning our predecessor, tried to come up with a code of conduct, and they failed, and they came up with the so-called DOC, or the Declaration of Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, which is a non-binding agreement. In 2012, in Phnom Penh, during the Asean meet, we reiterated that that was the 10th year of the attempt at coming up with the COC, and the COC still does not exist. As a result of which, there are, I think there have been a couple, literally two preliminary meetings, hopefully will lead to the formal meetings and to draw up all of the parameters. All the parties have reiterated their desire to come up with this code of conduct at the soonest possible time. But soonest in the diplomatic sphere is not exactly soonest in the corporate world.
Do you detect any sort of change in the Chinese approach to these issues? I mean, or is it just making nice during a big international meeting where China is center stage?
Well, we hope that it does represent a change. The mere fact that we are talking again is already a substantial change. Previously, there was an exchange of rhetoric. Well, not really an exchange. There was a lot of rhetoric that stated one position to the exclusion of the other. Now we are talking, and the mere fact that we are talking hopefully signifies an attempt to really arrive at a compromise and a just solution to the issue.
Turning now to another of your many summits, ASEAN. Obviously, ASEAN has 2015 is a big year for ASEAN. Yes. It has the ambitions of an ASEAN community. So, how does this? How important is this for the Philippines, first of all? And what can we realistically expect from it? Is it just rhetoric, or is it going to mean something substantive?
Well, as far as the Philippines is concerned, we're high 80s, 82 of the targets, 82% of the targets have already been accomplished. Of course, the remaining portions are the most ticklish, but we're focused that there is a 600 million member market as opposed to the 100 million market that we now possess domestically. There are various complementary relations amongst the 10 member ASEAN countries. It is not a big bang that everything will happen almost in completion by next year. It is still a work in progress. There is still need for harmonization of standards and rules and so on and so forth. But there doesn't seem to be any opposition within the bloc to stymie the process or to delay the process.
Could you ever see ASEAN becoming something more like the European Union, where there is a really strong, I mean, at the moment it's a consensual organization, so that obviously slows things down tremendously. Could you imagine it becoming a beefier structure where things are pushed through and require much the sort of sacrifices of national sovereignty that my own country, Britain, is so uncomfortable with often?
Well, my personal bias is really to try and achieve the consensus. A consensus might take longer, but you do have longer lasting relationships and firmer decisions rather than what responds to the current emergency. Now, will it be a strong? When I started out in office, we had probably about a year into office, we had the Arab Spring, and we have a 10 million member community of overseas foreign workers, Filipino workers outside the country, and a lot of them were in the Middle East. Unfortunately, we don't have posts in all of the countries that were affected. And initially, I talked with the President Yudhoyono then, who I asked if we could assist each other's citizens if we had posts where the other did not. And even in the absence of any written document, that assistance was rendered so that we were managed to protect all of our citizens, dependent on who had the ability at that particular point in time. We coordinated also in terms of repatriating our expats in various trouble spots. And disaster reduction also, it's very, very strong. Indonesia, in fact, Indonesia, Singapore, I think I will be hard-pressed to say that any member of the Asean community did not immediately respond when we were hit by Typhoon Haiyan last year.
Yes, yes. Well, on that subject, can you tell us a bit how the recovery from that disaster is going now and how much work lies ahead?
Okay, well, number one, we just commemorated the first year of it. We spent about 7 months primarily in the relief effort and the start of the rehabilitation effort. We have a 36,000-kilometer coastline, which is, a lot of it is vulnerable to storm surges and also the new global norm. We don't get typhoons, for instance, in the November, December months. We get the most violent ones now in the November and December period. Now,
That's a change, is it, from
very, very significant
historically?
change.
So,
You hardly, actually, even a few years ago, I don't think there were rains in December, for instance. Now you get not just the rains, but very, very strong rains and very, very strong storms at that point in time. Okay. Now, where are we at? There's 160 billion, about 160 billion pesos worth of endeavors that we have to do. We spent about 50 billion already. And the bulk of the things that are manageable and doable while we are in office will be completed by next year. What does this mean? We have a phrase to explain what we're trying to do. We want to build back better. What does that mean? We get visited by typhoons, for instance, 20 typhoons a year. There's destruction. You rebuild it in the same place to the same standards, etc. The next typhoon comes in after completing it, then you have the same level of destruction. What we're trying to do is build the communities back in a situation, whether it's the new standards, whether it's different locations, and various other interventions, planting mangroves, seawalls, better warning systems, and so on and so forth, wherein they will be really more resistant to all of these changes in the climate and the severity and all of these natural disasters. Unfortunately, the Philippines is part of the Ring of Fire. Therefore, we have active volcanoes. We have part of the typhoon belt, the earthquake belt. There's so many clubs we're part of that we hope there was an exit mechanism for. But having said that, we're trying to be smarter in terms of smarter and I guess more decisive in the sense of not allowing communities that are in vulnerable areas to remain because we're scared to challenge the socio-cultural reasons for objecting to transferring. We will be seeking the consensus, but actively forcing communities to move to better areas.
Can I stick with domestic policies and outlook in the Philippines? You alluded yourself to the fact that your term ends, in fact,
2016.
2016, and you were saying earlier that there's sort of a counting off of the days. How many days left do you have now?
590.
590.
But that's we're not looking at it every day.
And of course, you're term limited under the Constitution to 1 6-year term, and there was some speculation which you've pushed aside now that you might seek to change the Constitution.
There were reporters who were proposing.
There were
change.
reporters who were proposing. So, but why not as a matter of interest? Is a single term a good idea for a country? It's Mexico has it, but America has 2 terms. France, I believe, has 2 terms. So, is this a sensible way of operating?
Number one, well, we're trying to move away from politics of personalities to politics of issues. We want to strengthen the party systems that they represent specific ideologies. Now, we have to go back to the historical record. In our country, we have this saying that I'm trying to translate it. It says something to the effect that people, if you don't look to the past, you will not get to the future. Mm-hmm. And in our past, we had a gentleman who had 2 terms, the maximum under that constitution, who managed to gain another 23 years. No,
You do realize you're talking in Singapore here.
No, but But you have elections. But there were elections that I don't think anybody protested the results of. In our case, in all honesty, there was an interim parliamentary election in 1978. And I'm not sure if they have come up with the official results of that in terms of who voted but they just came up with tallies for the ruling bloc. But there is a speculation that there were double the number of voters than people who voted rather than those who were eligible.
Yeah.
Double the number. So going back.
Yeah.
If you're not looking towards re-election, then you can do the unpopular decisions when they're needed. You're focused to find the solutions that are indirect answers to the question rather than how will my poll numbers be affected by this. Then also the idea that, and I go back to our history, there will always be that when you become president and you go after vested interests, and we're a very litigious society. In fact, by practice and by our law, a sitting president cannot be sued. Can be impeached, then when he reverts back to being an ordinary citizen, can be sued. There have been cases filed by some of our opponents against me, and not an impeachment case. And it was not dismissed outright. So question of judicial speed also is an issue. But the bottom line is there will always be somebody who will not be able to let go of the tail of the tiger, who thinks they're God's given son to this world, and will always seek ways and means to perpetuate themselves in power to the detriment of our country.
And the anxiety is, of course, I'm sure the anxiety is real in your position that you introduce these reforms and you worry that those reforms might be undone by your successors. So is that a concern for you, that the changes that you've introduced are fragile by dint of not being deeply entrenched yet over time?
We're trying to get our people used to the idea that your government can work. Our slogan when we campaigned was, where there is no corruption, there should be no poverty. And good governance is good economics. And what we hope they will see is that we inherited, for instance, a backlog of 66,800 classrooms. We have a budget that can support the construction of 8,000 classrooms a year. We've finished the 66,800 in our third year in office. We are now constructing the necessary classrooms for the increase of 2 years in our basic education program. So the people have noticed. Our children used to walk X kilometers to go to school. It's now there. We've enrolled something like 20% more of the population in the National Health Insurance Program. We've moved 2.5 million out of poverty. When there's a typhoon, government will not come to you. Government is normally, except for Haiyan, which was so severe, already there with the first responders, with the relief goods, with the medicine, with et cetera, et cetera. So all of this we did without raising taxes, except for the so-called sin taxes. Now, the people have had at least 4 years of this now. Then their question will always be how, and in fact, people who are jockeying to replace me have kept on saying they will continue everything I'm doing. So who manages to convince the electorate will get a job, and to convince, there has to be a track record of having done these things and battling the vested interests.
So if you come back to these 60 days you have left?
Well, unfortunately, 590.
590. What do you want to achieve in that time? So this comes, and what do you expect to achieve in that time?
I think we've achieved biggest part of it.
But I'm urging you to look ahead
Yes.
in the spirit of the world in 2015 and beyond.
Okay. As far as the Philippines is concerned, and the Filipinos first.
Yes.
When I was being asked to run in 2010, my first reaction was, I was in a member of the opposition. We were trying to stop all of the things that were wrong, and it felt like we were hitting our heads in the wall for all the good that it did. Now that we have a new election, you're asking me to replace the person who will bequeath all of the problems to me. And I'm sorry, I'm not a masochist. Why should I bear the entire burden? Now, the biggest ambition for a lot of Filipinos was to leave the country. Now we're getting we won't say it's a very significant reverse migration, but it is happening.
Are you having a net reverse migration or not? Not yet, no.
But the goal is, I went to we went to Davos, and the way back we passed by Dubai. There were a lot of Filipinos in the stores there in the airports, and a lot of them were saying, "Sir, hasten the opportunities back home so that we can go back home." No, so instead of trying to convince them to come back home, they're actually trying to egg me on to speed up all of the changes that will enable them to do so. The head of our meteorological bureau gave up a very high-paying job because he wanted to contribute. He has instituted this early warning system that is very effective, located in, I think, the 18 major river basins already, that gives our people at least a 6-hour window of warning. So the change in attitude, that there's pride now that we can do so many things, that there's so many opportunities that are opening up, have opened. I mean, even a lot of times I see signs before that where when you were looking for employment on factories, etc., it always said no vacancies. Now a lot of them are saying for immediate hiring, the following are needed. And we're having actually shortages in several accountants, for that matter. People who wanted a sure white-collar job would go into a degree of program called BS Commerce, major in accounting. Now even the schools that are teaching cannot fill up their accountancy positions within the school because the students are being recruited on their third year, wherein they have to finish fourth year and they have to go through exams afterwards. 2 years before they're ready, they're being recruited.
So one more question before I want to throw it open to the floor for a few questions from you. Just again, to press you on the future, if you could pick 2 or 3 things that you would hope to accomplish in your remaining 590 days in office, what would they be?
Well, it was speeding up all of the infrastructure that we're doing. We're about how much? We're targeting 5% of our GDP in terms of measure for infrastructure by 2016. We're almost at 4, 3.5 to 4 this year. Well, and the reforming the bureaucracy is also a major thing. The judiciary is also another pet issue of mine from time to time. But at the end of the day, we are saying that government has been reinvigorated and is now in a position to empower its citizenry. And you can see that, again, in terms of very heavily emphasis on education. Even the health services, they've had a 300% increase in the terms of the budget from the time we started. So, again, we believe that our greatest resource are the people, and the people now are exercising all of their freedoms and have belief in themselves and belief in the ability of the country by the time we leave.
Very good. Now this is your chance to ask President Aquino a question. We have just over 6 minutes left. Who would like to ask a question? We have some roving microphones in the room, so please raise your hand, and if I can see past these lights, I will call on you to. Don't be shy. Yes, one here at the front. Mike will be with you. Could you say who you are, please? And could you keep your question short, because our time is short?
My name is Vidar Anderson from DNB Bank. It's a pleasure to hear you, sir. With everything you achieved in your current role and the outlook you have that impressed many in this room, after 2016, will you look for domestic opportunities or international opportunities?
For me personally?
Personally.
By our laws, I cannot work for about a year. You cannot participate in an industry regulated. But so we're all looking forward to at least 1 year that we can ignore the newspapers, the TV, etc., and recharge. Especially to those who are most affected by our work. We have a very, how should I put it, very energetic media in our country. So afterwards, I'm not really sure. My mother went into microfinance post her presidency. She saw it as the direct means of empowering. There's always the challenge of the big group that's diffused or a very small focus group that you have very tangible results in. And I guess to a large degree, I will still be helping the party to become that party of ideology that has a platform that is constant and will continue.
Another question. Who would like to? Yes, sir. The second table in here. The microphone is on the way.
I'd just like to address the president and
Could you say
ask
who you
him-
are, sort of very quickly?
I'm asking this as a personal question, not on behalf of the
Yep.
organization. Let me be very clear about it. I work for JP Morgan Asset Management, and I just want to ask you, I come from India and I've been here for 20 odd years, and the rising new entrepreneurs in Philippines, and how do you see that scene? Is it an extremely short, concentrated profile of few entrepreneurs being prevalent in every sector of the business, or are you seeing a trend of broadening class of entrepreneurship?
Well, there's a new generation now. Since you come from India, sorry, makes me recall. We recently bidded out the contract or the PPP project for a project called the Cebu Mactan Airport, won by a joint venture between GMR Corporation and a local company called Megawide. I was very impressed with the two officers of Megawide, the Filipino corporation. The senior partner was all of 40 years old, and the younger one was 39. And this is a 14 billion, no, it's not a 14 billion. How much is it total? 14 billion is the premium that will be paid, in addition to the construction costs, etc. So that's one set of entrepreneurs. Tomorrow I'll be going to a Filipino fast food entity called Jollibee. Jollibee started out as an ice cream parlor, and it's now one of our biggest multinationals in, I don't remember exactly how many countries they do have. So there are more and more opportunities that are coming up for very different, for a lot of sectors. You can see it in the robustness of the competition for the PPP programs. All the major conglomerates normally tend to try and outdo each other, and all you have to do is read our media to see how sometimes acrimonious the fight is, indicative of how serious the competition is currently. So we've leveled the playing field. Everybody will have to demonstrate based on their merits who delivers the best project. JP Morgan actually was one of the first that inspired me early on in the term. They actually have seminars for investment planning for the young, upwardly mobile professionals, especially in the BPO sector.
Excellent. Well, we're almost out of time, so I want to ask one more question, because I think it's an important area to cover. Mindanao and the agreement that you reached with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, obviously potentially a landmark for the Philippines. What has to happen next year to make sure that that is embedded? And do you see this as in some way, what are the lessons from this for other troubled disputes around the world? Do you have any advice for outsiders about how to reach such agreements?
Well, first of all, it has been a long-running problem in the country, dating to the late 60s to the present. At one point in time, and up to now, in a certain degree, you have the combatants facing each other and trying to achieve a modicum of trust, which to advance the cause. Substantial help came from a lot of other countries that had problems similar to this. For instance, England was very generous in terms of telling us the experiences in Northern Ireland about how much of a control of the police forces was necessary for the partners in the dialogue and so on and so forth. It made all of the demands realistic. It made us closer to each other in terms of positions. So we're hoping that the law that will embody all of this, all of the agreements, will be passed by our Congress and ratified in the plebiscite by this year, which will give the new entity and the new form of governance there about a year and a half before they have to win a mandate in the national elections and general elections of 2016. Now, the basic major difference is, whereas before there was a very strong executive in the form of a governor who normally tended to protect his clan and his tribe, if at all, this new setup will be somewhat of a parliamentarian system where the power resides in the parliament and the chief minister exercises policies from a predominantly party list-oriented parliament with 50%. 10% will be reserved for women and the indigenous blocks. Only 40% will be through direct election. That changes the political landscape. And again, all stakeholders' views have to be addressed by this chief minister, not just at certain times, but all the time. So we hope that that will make it all-inclusive, and we have finished drafting the plan on what has to be done in terms of infrastructure, reforms in education, the health system, so on and so forth, to the degree that some of our MILF brothers are now taking governance courses in the southern portion of Luzon, preparatory to their taking over. Transfer of the assets and the budget for this is already, actually it's within our means already, even at this point in time, waiting for Congress's approval to be dispersing the amounts. The amounts are substantial from our perspective. Whereas the country grew by 6.4% in the second quarter, they traditionally had 1% increase in GDP. It has increased now to 3.5. And we think not too long a period, they will match the national average.
Good. Well, obviously wish you good luck with that. The final question, do you have a prediction for us for 2015?
There's nothing I know that you don't all know. Europe still has, still feeble. You have all these threats of how will the pandemics be a dampener to the recovering economy. You have the end of the, quantitative easing in one sector and the continuation of the same in two other substantial markets. So I guess at the end of the day, if you're optimistic, you would want to view all of these things as challenges that makes life worthwhile rather than problems that cannot be overcome. At the end of the day, we will overcome all of this. But at the end of the day also, the more degree of cooperation we exercise with each other, the closer we get to that solution.
Well, I think that's a very fitting note to end on. Thank you very much indeed, President Keynote. Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, just before we serve the main course for you and we break for that, let me just remind you, tell you of a couple of things and give you one further thing to chew on. Remind you to take your photographs and to send them to